Mud clung to Rachel's torn hands as she unearthed a rusted chest hidden beneath her dying farm. Inside, among crumbling deeds and faded letters, she found proof that the land everyone thought was lost had always been hers, but claiming it would ignite a battle no one expected. What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The road to the Holloway farm was little more than a scar of gravel cutting through waist-high grass and broken fence posts. Rachel's tires crunched slowly along the uneven track, the old station wagon rattling as if it, too, protested the journey. The house came into view like a wounded soldier staggering from a long-lost battle. The roof sagged toward the earth, and the porch steps twisted at unnatural angles, covered in a lattice of creeping vines and rotting wood. A battered mailbox hung by one rusted hinge, the name Holloway barely legible under decades of grime. Rachel parked and sat in silence for a moment, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel. The smell of damp earth seeped through the cracked windows, raw, pungent, unforgiving. Tyler stirred in the back seat, his face soft with sleep, oblivious to the magnitude of the moment pressing down on his mother. This wasn't a fresh start. It was a battlefield. She climbed out into the brittle afternoon air, boots sinking into mud slick from an overnight rain. Every step toward the house was a negotiation between hope and fear. Flakes of faded yellow paint peeled from the siding, fluttering to the ground like exhausted moths. One window was boarded shut, another gaped open, a jagged mouth broken by storms and time. Rachel shoved her shoulder against the swollen front door. It groaned on its hinges before surrendering, revealing a hollowed-out interior where dust motes danced like pale ghosts in slanting bars of light. The living room was stripped bare. No furniture, no curtains, just the skeletal outlines of where life had once clung. Nail holes on faded walls, the imprint of a rug on worn floorboards, a child's handprint smudged high on the frame of a long missing door. She crossed the threshold anyway. Because what else was there? Pride? Pride hadn't kept the lights on after Jason died. Pride hadn't filled the pantry or shielded Tyler from the kind of hunger that gnawed at more than just the stomach. No. Survival didn't leave room for pride. Rachel exhaled shakily and let her fingers trail along the nearest wall, feeling the deep scars carved into the wood. Memories, maybe, of arguments, laughter, small victories, long defeats. This house wasn't just broken. It was waiting for someone stubborn enough, desperate enough, to believe it could be made whole again. In the silence, she heard it. Not a voice, not a call, but something older, deeper. A heartbeat under the floorboards, in the beams, in the earth itself. Steady, waiting, daring her to stay. And she would. Because sometimes, the only way forward was through the ruins. The storm had cracked the sky open like a rotted branch, spilling rivers of rain across the fields and flattening everything in its path. Rachel fought through the wreckage, mud sucking at her boots, the acrid sting of ozone still thick in the air. The oak by the back fence, ancient, sprawling, the only real monument left on the property, now lay gutted across the pasture, its massive roots clawing toward the sky in a final desperate reach. Armed with nothing but stubbornness and a dented shovel, Rachel set to work, pulling free the splintered limbs that smothered her struggling tomato plants. Every stroke of the blade was a battle against exhaustion, against the quiet voice that whispered this was all a mistake, that she would never fix this broken land. She refused to listen. It happened midway through clearing the second root ball. The shovel struck something solid with a jarring clang, a vibration that ran up her arms and into her teeth. Stone, she thought first. But no, this was sharper, almost hollow. Dropping to her knees, heedless of the mud staining her jeans, she clawed at the earth with both hands, peeling away sodden clumps of soil until her fingers scraped against metal. A box. Big, heavy, rimmed with iron, so black with rust it looked bruised. Her breath hitched. The rational part of her screamed to leave it. Old farm junk, some hazard left to rot. But another part, deeper and older, urged her on. She worked faster, rocks cutting her palms, until the entire thing lay exposed, caked in centuries of filth. The chest was locked, but the wood around the iron fittings had long since surrendered to decay. With a grunt, Rachel wedged the shovel into a split seam and pried. The lid gave way with a shriek that sounded almost alive in the charged air. Inside, the past breathed out at her. Parchments, their edges curled and brittle. Journals whose covers bore the scrawled names of people long gone. She brushed trembling fingers across a yellowed map. Lines and plots marked with names she knew from town, names that carried weight in whispered rumors. And tucked deep beneath it all, a leather satchel, the initials E.W. embossed on the flap, still faintly visible despite the rot. She opened it and pulled free the letter. Her grandmother's name, Eleanor Whitman, written in a hand both elegant and urgent. Rachel's heart hammered so violently she thought it might crack her ribs. She recognized the crest stamped faintly on the letterhead, a symbol her father had once proudly worn on a jacket that was pawned long before she was old enough to ask why they never owned anything of their own. She read. She reread. And when the meaning finally sank through the noise of the storm and the blood pounding in her ears, Rachel staggered back, landing hard in the mud. The land was hers. It had always been hers. The Holloways hadn't owned it. They had taken it, by theft, by lies, by burying the truth as deeply as this chest had been buried. For a long time, Rachel knelt there, soaked to the bone, the wind howling around her like the voices of the dead who had waited too long for justice. The mud stained her skin. The rain washed nothing clean, but in her hands she held a key, not just to the land, but to the truth. And that changed everything. The courthouse smelled of mildew and varnish, the scent of old battles fought in quiet desperation. Rachel Whitman stood just inside the threshold, the leather satchel clutched tight against her chest, her palms slick with cold sweat. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, striping the floor in sickly gold, while every creak of the ancient building seemed to echo with a warning she refused to heed. Across the lobby, Harold Green waited. He was dressed like the town's idea of a success story. Crisp charcoal suit, silk tie, shoes polished to a blinding sheen. But there was something in the way he held himself, too stiff, too smooth, that made Rachel's skin crawl. His smile, when it came, was thin and bloodless, an expression crafted for negotiations, not for human connection. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, his voice a soft blade sliding between pleasantries. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Rachel didn't move. She could feel Tyler's drawing tucked in her coat pocket, a picture of their farmhouse, crude and shaky, with a bright red heart scrawled over the roof. It anchored her better than any steel could. "You came for the chest," she said, not a question. Green's eyes flickered, just briefly, before settling into practiced sympathy. "It's complicated," he said, his voice oozing false kindness. "Those documents, they're sensitive. You see, the Holloway family stole this land," Rachel cut in, her voice steady despite the roar in her ears. "From my grandmother, from my father, from me." Green's smile didn't falter, but his jaw tightened at the edges. "Mistakes were made," he allowed. "But dragging it all into court, exposing painful history, that helps no one, especially not you." Rachel stepped closer, and Green, for the first time, leaned back ever so slightly. "You're not here to protect anyone," she said,
each word a nail hammered into the lie he wrapped around himself like armor. You're here because you know exactly what's in those papers. You're here because if this story gets out, your friends lose everything they built on a lie. The veneer cracked then, a flash of anger, sharp and hot, before it disappeared behind another mask of cool professionalism. You should think about your future, he said, voice dropping into something darker. You don't have the money for lawyers. You don't have the time for a fight. Rachel met his gaze and didn't blink. I have nothing, she said, a quiet fury threading through every syllable. Which means I have nothing left to lose. She turned away, her boots striking the worn marble floor like war drums, leaving Harold Green standing amid the dusty echoes of the past he had helped bury. Rachel didn't look back. She had a date with the county clerk. She had proof to file. And for the first time in years, she had a fight she intended to win. The hearing room was too small to hold the weight of so many years of silence. Rachel sat alone at the plaintiff's table, the battered leather satchel open in front of her like a war flag. Every page inside it was a relic soaked in betrayal. Land deeds signed under false pretenses, contracts laced with half-truths, letters that bled the desperation of a family forced from their rightful home. Behind her, a tide of people filled the gallery. Farmers with dirt still under their nails, teachers with heavy briefcases, old men wearing battered veteran caps. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a verdict louder than any gavel strike. Harold Green sat across from her, flanked by two attorneys from some polished Nashville firm, their suits and smooth haircuts as out of place here as vultures circling a wounded animal. Green's face was a rigid mask, but his fingers tapped a frantic, silent rhythm against the polished oak of the defense table. The judge, an old woman with tired eyes and a spine of iron, read through the evidence in silence, page by page, document by document. The room held its breath, as if even the dust motes in the shafts of late afternoon light understood the gravity of this moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but firm, each word landing like a hammer blow. The court finds in favor of Rachel Whitman, she said. The property, and all attached claims, are hereby restored to the Whitman estate. The sound that followed wasn't cheers. It wasn't shouts. It was a collective exhale, a great, shuddering breath from a room that had been holding its lungs hostage for far too long. Rachel stood, her legs trembling under the weight of it. As she turned to leave, the people who had filled the gallery rose with her, a silent procession of respect. Green didn't move. His world had already collapsed inward, leaving him trapped in the rubble of his own making. Outside, the Tennessee sky stretched wide and clean, the storm clouds of the past few weeks finally swept away. Rachel drove home in a daze, the narrow gravel road now a sacred path beneath her wheels. The farm rose up before her, broken still, weathered still, but hers. The house leaned like it always had, stubborn and battered, but no longer abandoned. Tyler waited on the porch, barefoot and smiling, a baseball glove tucked under one arm. Rachel stepped out of the car, her boots hitting the dirt with a finality that shook her to the core. She opened her arms, and Tyler barreled into them with the fierce joy only children could still summon. They stood there, wrapped together under the gold flare of the setting sun, as the land whispered around them. Through the broken fence posts, the wild tangles of kudzu, the battered boards of the porch. It didn't matter what the house looked like. It didn't matter how much work lay ahead. They were home. Home in the way that couldn't be bought or sold or stolen, only earned through blood, heartbreak, and an unbreakable refusal to give up. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the heartbeat of the land under her feet. The Whitmans were back, and this time
no one would ever take it from them again.